Okay, let's talk about the Janome Schoolmate sewing machine, the sewing machine at Ballackinwood and Welsh Valley Middle School. There's a bunch of parts that you need to know about how they work and how to use them safely in order to be a successful family consumer science student and feel comfortable on the machine. So please take out your sewing packet with your machine study guide or open the electronic version of the machine parts worksheet on Blackboard. So here we go. Number one, the first part we're going to talk about is the bobbin cover. And it is a plastic cover that covers where your bobbin goes. Sewing machines operate with two threads, and the bobbin cover covers where the bottom thread is placed into the machine. There's a small black slider that will open up the bobbin cover when you're ready to insert or remove a bobbin. And you want to be careful that you do not lose this cover. So every time you take it off, you put it back on and make sure it's like a battery case. Those nubs on the bobbin cover go first. So on your study guide, where it says number 1 in the bottom left-hand corner of the first page of your worksheet, you are writing down that number 1 is the bobbin cover. For each part, you only need to write the name of the part on your study guide, and you can refer back to this presentation at any time for the description of the part. Okay, number 2 is the throat plate. This is a really important area of the sewing machine for safety. It's the entire metal landing plate basically around the needle. You do not want to be poked by your needle while you're sewing. That's pretty much a given, right? If your fingers are not passing over the metal throat plate, then they are never close to the needle or closer than 1 or 2 inches from the needle. And that way you could not possibly be poked. So while you are sewing, it's very important that your fingers that are holding and guiding the fabric are not passing over this throat plate. You'll also find on the throat plate that there's a seam guide. You can see this by the blue triangle. They are engraved lines that give us standard measurements from the needle to let you know how close or how far from the edge you will be actually sewing. The standard seam allowance that we use in Family Consumer Sciences is the 5/8 inch. So number 2 is the throat plate. Number 3 is the thread tension dial. There's actually 2 of them. This picture is passing through the black thread tension dial straight to the white thread tension dial. They are both thread tension dials, and you do not want to adjust them. Tension is referring to how tight or loose your machine is holding on to the thread that's passing through it. So it's important that you have the appropriate tension so that your machine can form nice, neat, strong, regular stitches. If the tension is off, then your machine may not be able to sew appropriately. So it's a little bit different for every machine, and please don't make any adjustments to either of these settings. On the the black dial where it has a 2 and an upside down 3 that you can see in this picture, or on the white dial that has the 5-4-3. So don't make any adjustments to these. If you are sewing and you find that your stitches look irregular, maybe they're loose or they look extra bunchy, it may be a tension dial and you'll need to have your teacher check and adjust it. Please do not adjust it yourself. Okay, number 4 is the spool pin and holder. The spool pin is located, well, both of these parts are located in the top of your machine, and you need to open the top lid or top cover to see them. The spool pin holds the spool of thread, and it's pretty fragile. It does kind of tilt up to be able to easily put that thread on, but you want to make sure that you're not pulling on it very hard. You don't want to break it. They are difficult to replace. The spool holder actually holds the spool on the spool pin. It's a round plastic disc. And because this disc is removed to put the spool on the spool pin and then replaced to hold the spool on the spool pin, it comes on and off of your machine. It's another one of those parts, just like the bobbin cover, we want to be very careful that we do not lose. So make sure every time you take it off, you are making a point to put it back. That way we will not lose our parts. Okay, number 5, extremely important. It's the safety and it's a bobbin winder. This is also at the top of your machine, all the way to the right. It looks like a metal post that kind of scoots back and forth in the left-hand position, which it is in currently, or in the right-hand position, which would be, if you imagine it just shifting over to the right a bit. The safety is a clutch. And what that means is it engages or disengages the gears that make your machine sew. When the safety is in this position, the safety is currently off. So this picture is showing you a safety that's off. That means if you go to sew, you push down the foot pedal, your machine will start to sew. The needle will go up and down. If we were to push this safety, this metal post over to the right, we would be turning the machine safety on. When the safety is on, it actually separates the gears that connect the motor to the needle. And why we're calling it a safety is when the motor and the needle are not connected, you can press that foot pedal, but your needle will not move. It's like revving a car whose engine is in neutral. This is a very important safety feature because when you are threading the machine, unjamming, changing needles, or making fine adjustments in the area of the needle, it's very important you don't accidentally engage that needle and have it start moving while your fingers are in that area. So you always want to have the safety on, which means pushed over to the far right side of the machine while you're making any adjustments to the needle. The only time when it needs to be off is when you are actively sewing your fabric and you are very well aware of where your fingers are located. Now, number 5, again, this is not a typo. It's here twice, okay? Because not only is this part a safety feature that keeps that needle from moving when you don't want it to move, it's also the bobbin winder. This is probably its primary function. Remember, I told you the bobbins are the bottom threads in the machine. They come empty and this tool will wind them up. So when you turn on your bobbin winder, you're really engaging the safety. You're pushing that bobbin winder to the right. And when you start to hit your foot pedal, the needle will not move. The bobbin winder, or the safety, is going to start to spin. And that's how we wind bobbins on your sewing machine. The stitch length dial, number 6, remember you're just writing the part of the machine on your study guide. Number 6 determines the length of the stitch, and we usually operate between 2 and 3. So make sure you're writing the stitch length dial at number 6. At any time, if I move too fast, you can always pause this video presentation to find the part on your study guide or on your Blackboard test and answer it. Number 7 is the pattern selector dial, or a stitch pattern selector. This changes the stitches on your machine. And generally we are using the straight stitch or the zigzag stitch in FCS. Straight stitches are what we use to secure your sewing. It's like the standard sewing stitch, and zigzags finish the edge and keep the edge of the fabric from fraying. You always want to check the stitch before you start to sew. so that you know the machine is going to sew in the pattern that you are looking for. Okay, number 8 is the reverse. The reverse button sews in reverse. Sometimes people think it takes stitches out. It does not take out or undo any stitches. It puts more stitches in going backwards. To use this, you hold the reverse button down at the same time as engaging your foot pedal, and then your machine will sew backwards. And back stitching or sewing backwards is how we secure the beginning and end of our sewing on the sewing machine. Okay, number 9 is the machine socket. The machine socket is where we plug in the machine. The cord has one wire that goes to the foot pedal and one wire that goes to the wall. And you want to make sure this part of your machine, the socket is all the way plugged in so that both the foot pedal is working and you're getting adequate power from the wall. Number 10 is the machine on-off switch, located right next to the socket. This turns your machine on and off. Your machine has a small light that will come on when you turn your machine on, indicating that there is power. And generally, if your machine is on, the light is on. If your machine is off, you will not see that light, and you will know that your machine is off. You always want to make sure you turn the machine off at the end of each day so that they are not wasting energy in between classes or overnight. Number 11 is the hand wheel. This is a fun part. As you turn it, you will see that your needle will move up and down, your thread take-up lever will move, the feed dogs under your presser foot will move. You'll see some things moving around in the area where the bobbin is kept. And what it does is it manually moves your machine. So if you need to make a small adjustment, going just 1 or 2 stitches, or simply raising the needle out of your fabric, you will use the hand wheel to accomplish that. Generally, you turn the hand wheel towards your body. So if you're raising the needle, you always turn it towards you. If there is a jam, there are times that you may turn it away from you in order to help unjam your machine. But generally, you're turning this hand wheel towards your body, and you will see the parts move on your machine, specifically, and I think most importantly, the needle, because we use this to make adjustments with the needle to get it in just the right position that we're looking for. For the thread take-up lever, on your study guide, this is number 12. Okay, so we've been on the back of the sheet for a bit, and number 12 is at the very top of the diagram. This picture is looking at the thread take-up lever from the front of your machine, and on your study guide, it's looking at it from the back. But the thread take-up lever kind of looks like a bunny ear, or sometimes people call it a dinosaur, and it takes the thread up and down while your machine is running. So the thread take-up lever doesn't really do anything for you when you're just sewing on paper and there's no thread involved. But when you are sewing with thread, it's extremely important. It must be appropriately hooked in order for your machine to sew. If it is not hooked, then your machine is going to jam immediately when you try to sew. So the thread take-up lever, you always need to check that it is appropriately hooked when you are getting ready to sew with thread. The presser foot lifter is number 13. It's a black plastic lever that lifts the presser foot, and it is spring loaded. The main problem we see with these is people simply reach under the machine and flick them. And if you flick the presser foot lifter up or down, it's going to make a loud kind of spring snapping sound. And the spring can actually come loose and come out of your machine, and this part can break. So we want to make sure that when you're raising the presser foot lifter or lowering the presser foot lifter, that you're actually holding onto it with your fingers and gently raising or lowering, so that is not making those loud snapping sounds, and it is not, endangering the machine and causing springs to possibly come shooting out of it. Now, what does this presser foot lifter do? Number 13, the presser foot lifter lifts the presser foot, which we are going to get to in just a moment. But before we do, let's look at this needle screw. The needle screw is important to know about because it holds the needle in place, and we do replace needles as they are used and become dull or worn out, or if they break. And importantly, the needle screw goes up and down as your needle is moving. So it's essential that you are keeping your fingers and thumbs off of the throat plate, the metal plate surrounding your needle, because sometimes if you have your thumb resting on that metal plate, the needle screw is going to move down as you are sewing and the needle is moving down, and it actually pinches or squishes your thumb. And some people get really worried that they might have been poked by the needle, but a lot of times they're actually being squished or pinched by this needle screw. So the needle screw is important to know how to change the needle, but also to know that it is moving up and down along with your machine, and it's your finger position, your hand position when you're sewing is very important to keep your fingers safe. All right, here we are, number 15, the presser foot. This is a good picture. You can see here the presser foot kind of looks like a hoof, and it presses the fabric against these teeth underneath, which are called feed dogs. So your machine moves the fabric for you. When you determine that stitch length, these feed dogs move the fabric the appropriate amount, and as the needle goes up and down each time. If you are not pressing the fabric against the feed dogs using the presser foot, then there's no pressure there to keep your fabric moving. Your fabric will not move, and your machine will likely jam and become tangled. So it's important that you lift this presser foot. Right now it's in the up position. It's lifted when you are placing fabric or paper underneath and getting lined up. And then when you are ready and you think it's in the appropriate place, you use the presser foot lifter over here to lower gently the presser foot and hold that fabric against the machine so that you are ready to sew. All right, number 16, you should know from past experience with hand sewing, these are spools of thread, and spools of thread are used as the top threads when you are sewing on a sewing machine. All right, number 17. I think we only have one more part. Yeah, one more part after this. Number 17 is the bobbin. So remember, there are two threads. Spools of thread go in the top. Bobbins, which are wound and filled with thread, go in the bottom of the machine. Machines require two threads to sew, and we are using the clear plastic bobbins. You can see on the right, that is a bobbin that's empty. And then you would use a spool of thread and your bobbin winder or your machine safety to wind up thread onto that empty bobbin so that you are ready to sew. Last but not least, this is an extremely important part. We're saving the best for last. Number 18 is the foot pedal. So the foot pedal is like a gas pedal on your machine. That means It's variable. If you press it a little bit, then you're going to go a little bit. If you press it all the way, you're going to go as fast as your machine can go. We usually press this foot pedal about 50% to 2/3 of the way. You should not be flooring it to maximum speed at all times. That's not how you would drive a car or a go-kart, and it's not how you drive a sewing machine. So the foot pedal always goes on the floor when you're ready to sew. Your heel will go on the floor and your toe goes about where the arrow is pointing at the top of the foot pedal. You never want to put your entire foot or heel on the foot pedal. You use the foot pedal by using your toe to give you that pressing control. So you want to be gentle, you want to be aware of it, and you never want to have your foot on or over the foot pedal if you are not sewing. So when you want to sew, you press the foot pedal and your needle will start to move and your machine will sew. When you want to stop, you take your foot off the foot pedal and you stop. And you put your foot flat on the floor. Never, ever hover. One of the main safety rules that we have in the room is that you never hover your foot over the foot pedal. You never lightly, just rest it but not press it. No. If you are sewing, your foot's on the foot pedal. If you are not, your foot is on the floor. You want to be very careful that you don't accidentally engage your foot pedal and cause that needle to move when you're not expecting it. And you never certainly would touch anyone else's foot pedal because that would be very dangerous to you and to them and pretty irresponsible. So the foot pedal is what makes your machine go. You only touch it with your foot while you're actively sewing. And when you are not sewing, it's sitting and your foot is flat on the floor, not hovering over that foot pedal. Now, if you need to go back over any of these parts, you can always listen to the presentation again or check out the slides that are not narrated. Please make sure that your study guide is complete. If you're completing the worksheet on Blackboard, make sure you get 100%. If you don't, take it again until you get 100%. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in class for practice sewing on the machine.